Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jambo. Bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, historical neighborhood of Friedl in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so wicked happy that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations that we have with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show and let them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network and can find us on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Amazon Music, wherever you find your favorite shows. We have two wonderful guests today. Schu will be here to celebrate Louder Than Hunger. And we will also be joined by Amy Friedl. She'll be here to celebrate Strong Girls Travel.
You've heard the whispers. You've seen it on TV. You may have even seen the movie. Now it's time to bring Dungeons and Dragons directly to you with D&D for Hire!
More than just a game, D&D lets you step into the role of a hero you create and guide them on fantastical adventures with your friends. Perfect for beginners and experts alike, D&D for Hire is sure to delight and entertain your kids for weeks on end.
Such a fun game. There are endless possibilities. There's so many things that you can do. It's so much fun.
Our son Eli loves D&D. It's like his favorite thing to do all week.
I was like 15 when I joined. I'm 21 now. There are people who are in our party, really learn to come out of their shells.
Whether you're near or far, whether you're looking for a birthday party or a campaign to keep you adventuring for years to come, D&D for Hire has you covered. Learn more at dndforhire.com. That's dndforhire.com. D&D for Hire, bringing the adventure to you. D&D for Hire runs games digitally over Zoom or in person in select areas.
Hey, quick question. Are you raising a reader? Are you ready to embark on a journey of imagination and adventure with your family? Then look no further than Dear Fam, the ultimate destination for family reading fun. Join the Dear Fam movement and unlock your child's love for reading with Dear Fam, the reading journal tracking app. Develop critical thinking skills. Set up reading goals with your child as they earn reading badges. Get notified when your child shares their reading journals. Share with family, friends, and teachers. Start your family's next reading adventure today with Dear Fam. That's spelled DEARFAM, where reading together means bonding forever. Dear Fam, now available on the App Store and at Google Play. Dear Fam. Before we invite our guests into the studio, I want to ask you, are you looking for a unique way to support diverse voices in literature? Introducing By YQ Book Fairs, where every page tells a story of empowerment, culture, and diversity. By YQ Book Fairs is a 100% women and minority-owned initiative showcasing a hand-picked selection of diverse books that celebrate inclusivity and representation. From captivating narratives to thought-provoking poetry, our curated collection has something for everyone. And hosting a By YQ Book Fair is a super easy and a fantastic way to raise funds for your organization or cause. So why wait? Visit buyobq.com today to learn more about how you can bring the magic of diverse literature to your community while supporting women and minority-owned businesses. Oh, I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while. Joining us from New York City, our guest is here to celebrate his really powerful new picture book. It's called Louder Than Hunger. Please welcome to the show, Schu. John, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me and for chatting with me today about Louder Than Hunger and story and anything else that we talk about today.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I have a feeling, just based on our pre-recording chat, that we have a lot to talk about. Why don't we start by telling everybody what Louder Than Hunger is all about?
Louder Than Hunger is my debut novel in verse that is told in 3 acts. So in Act 1, you meet Jake Edward Stacy, and my name is John Edward Schumacher, but I go by John Schu. And so Jake and I have the same initials. And so Jake is really me. But I decided early on in the writing process that I did not want to write a memoir, that I wanted to write a book that was a fictionalized experience of my childhood. And so Jake Stacy, who I know very, very well, in Act 1 is spiraling out of control, and there's a voice in his head that's getting very, very loud. And through Act 1, we see how that voice is starting to take over his life. And then in Act 2 of Louder Than Hunger, Jake is hospitalized in a facility called Whispering Pines for anorexia nervosa, depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. And we follow Jake as he tries to combat the voice, but the voice is so loud at times that he doesn't feel like he can ever do that. But he has some trials and tribulations during Act 2. And then in Act 3, he goes home and he fails miserably. And then he goes back into Whispering Pines. And during Act 3, he really decides that he's tired of being sick and he's tired of listening to this voice. And so he starts to listen to his psychologist, Dr. Parker, as well as the people that are trying to help Jake survive. So Louder Than Hunger is a really raw story based on my own experiences, but I always say to people who know me, you know that the story ends okay because I am Jake and Jake is me.
Well, I'm certainly happy that there are some authors who come on who write 30-page picture books and they say, I'm not going to tell you the ending. But I'm glad we know that Jake and John are okay right now.
Yeah.
I imagine that it must have taken a fair amount of courage to tell your story in this novel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like for a long time, I knew that I wanted to tell this story, but I never felt like I was at the right place in my life emotionally or as a writer to be able to do the story justice. And I also wanted to write a story that I thought could be the perfect prescription to let kids know that they were going to be okay if they were struggling with similar things, or if they had a lot of self-doubt, or if they themselves had an inner saboteur that was telling them a lot of, negative thoughts and that was trying to overtake them, that I didn't want to write a story in any way that would be harmful to kids or harmful to any reader. And so I think personally I had to be emotionally strong enough to write a story that was hopeful, a story that could show people the tools to get to the other side, to push through, and to know that you are going to be okay.
Yeah. The first thing that came to my mind when I was reading the notes for the interview was, on seeing that Jake suffered from anorexia, that that's something that we usually associate with girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody to know that it's something that there are guys who have to deal with this as well.
Yeah, well, like my story, Louder Than Hunger, takes place in 1996, and I think then there was even more of a stigma, that we didn't talk as much about males with eating disorders. When I was in treatment for my eating disorder, I actually appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and Oprah interviewed me when I was 14, and the topic was males with eating disorders. And recently I rewatched that segment with Oprah, and I remember thinking, wow, we've come a long way in the way that we talk about, bodies and disordered eating, but we still have a long way to go. That some of the questions that I was asked, I think were insensitive, and some of the ways that we talked about body imagery were a bit insensitive then. And so I'm grateful for that we've come a bit further, but we have a long way to go still. That we still are sometimes surprised that males, have eating disorders as well.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we have come a long way. Anorexia was something that you heard a lot about back in the 90s, and it was all over TV. And unfortunately, in our country, it seems that things come in fads. And, there's a big problem, and we're going to look at it, and we're going to talk about it for a couple of years, and then we're going to forget about it and move on to the next thing. And I know that there are still people who are suffering and dealing with body image issues. And so can we just dive in a little bit about some of the things you are feeling and the best ways we can support those that we love?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I'm 42 years old, and for a very, very long time, I did not talk about my eating disorder. So I was hospitalized when I was 14. From age 14 to 17, my eating disorder was such a big part of my life. And then when I went to college, I decided to pretend as though I never had an eating disorder, even though I was struggling at times. And it wasn't until like 2 years ago, at age 40, that I started to talk about it again. So I think there's a lot of like shame with disordered eating. I think there's a lot of guilt with disordered eating, but the more we talk about it and the more that we humanize it and the more that we say this is something that so many people struggle with, but we have to talk about it so that when people are struggling, that they feel comfortable enough to ask for help and that they know that they're not the only person. And this is all to say that now that I'm talking about it again, there's so many people that come through my signing lines or people during keynote presentations that I give who are sobbing. And I know that they themselves are struggling with disordered eating, or they have a child who's struggling. And over again, people tell me about their child, their son who's currently hospitalized, or they themselves who know that they need to seek treatment again because of me revealing the struggles that I had. And again, the positive aspect of that I got through it and that I turned that big V voice into a little V voice that I'm in control of, that they themselves feel more hopeful, that they themselves can seek treatment again, or that they have more awareness, more skills for how to talk to their own child or family members who are struggling. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I was thinking about when you were asking your question.
Yeah. You're the expert here, so you get all the answers right. But, it's interesting. We've hosted international kids here in our home, and they come to us from all over the world. And one of the young people who live with us was with us for 2 or 3 months, and at the end of the experience when she was going home, she revealed, right before I came here, I was in the hospital for a year for anorexia, and I'm like, that might have been helpful to know before you came, but I'm glad it was a good experience for you. You get through it. And and to be honest with you, as I look back, I'm kind of glad that she came here and we didn't know that, and that wasn't putting worries into my head. But what's the best way that we can support somebody that we love who is experiencing either OCD or an eating disorder or any kind of emotional or mental health challenge?
Yeah. I mean, I think each experience is so individualized, but like my family walked on eggshells for so long, and they were afraid of saying the wrong thing, and they were afraid of offending me, and they were afraid of me spiraling by saying, John, you look like you're doing better, which at that time meant, John, you've gained so much weight. And so I think in so many ways, like, you can't walk on eggshells. Mm-hmm. And when I was an adolescent, like, I kind of wanted my family to do that, but I think we just have to be honest, and we have to support, and we have to not be afraid to offend, is the advice that I give. Again, that won't work for everyone. Mm-hmm. And when I was in that situation, I wouldn't want that, but I needed that because for so long I knew I was struggling, but I was so afraid of anyone finding out that I had an eating disorder. But in the end, like toward the time that I was about to be hospitalized, I almost started becoming sloppy with my eating disorder because I wanted to be caught, because I was struggling so badly, and I was crying all the time, and I felt so lost, and I just wanted someone to rescue me. But I think more than anything, I just wanted somebody to listen to me, and I wanted somebody to be compassionate with me, and I wanted somebody to try to help me figure out why I was starving myself and why I was trying to become small and why I was depriving myself of the thing that was keeping me alive. And so each case is so individualized, but is what I often say to people is don't walk on eggshells, because that's what my family tried to do, and that was not successable.
Yeah. You mentioned in Jake's second hospitalization, and I imagine yours, that there came a moment where you finally decided that you wanted to be healthy. I think that's the way you worded it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Was there
because
one?
I was tired of being sick.
Okay, so it was just a matter. I'm wondering if there was a moment, if there was somebody that said something to you, or if it was just. I've heard this expression. I just became sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's like the line between what is my story and what is Jake's story. And I always say every emotion that Jake has in the book I have. But in order to make a fictionalized story, in order to have more suspense at times and additional characters, I had to go away from the truth. But the turning point in Louder Than Hunger, where Jake starts to do better, and my own story actually are the same. Where when I was hospitalized, we had to do day passes. And I would fail miserably over and over again on day passes. Sometimes a family member would come to pick me up and they wouldn't even leave. I'd say, no, I don't want to leave. I don't want to go with you. And sometimes I go on the day pass and it would be a miserable experience in a restaurant where I would refuse to eat, and I would cry and I would yell, and it was just awful. And so I didn't want to keep experiencing that. But in one of the day passes that I took in the book is with my dad, but in real life it was with my mom, where we went to a neighborhood called Lincoln Park in Chicago. I was hospitalized in the Chicago area. I'm from the Chicago area. And we just had this wonderful, perfect day in Lincoln Park where we went to the zoo and we wandered the streets and we went into a variety of, malls, and this was 1996, and we went to this wonderful bookshop called On a Bridge Books, and then we walked along Clark Street and Lincoln Park West and Armitage, and I remember thinking, I want to live here. This is where I belong, but I can never get to this place unless I get better. And I remember thinking, this is a goal. My goal is to eventually live in this neighborhood, and I know that this is a place where I would find community. And 10 years later, I lived in that neighborhood for 5 years. And so, but it was the goal that I set when I was 14, and then eventually moved to that neighborhood after college. And so for me, that was a turning point of you're never going to get to experience things like this daily, this perfect day that you could have as part of your daily life unless you start listening to your psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists.
Yeah. Interesting. 2 points I definitely want to touch on, and one is something that we've talked about here on the podcast, in not such a dramatic way, but just the power of dreams.
Yeah.
And you're sharing with us, it was that dream of living in that neighborhood that really helped you turn it around. It wasn't magic, but it gave you the vision of the goal to kind of start doing the work. The other thing I just wanted to point out is, because I had this feeling as you were describing yourself in the restaurants and yelling and screaming, and, the first thing in my mind is, oh, what a pain in the butt that must have been for your parents. But one of the things, and that's natural to think about, and that I'm sure your parents thought, wow, that this is a pain.
It's hard.
But I think when that's going on, I think it's important for us also to understand that was also really painful for you. Probably more painful than it was for your folks.
Well, yeah, and I always would think that. Again, when I was on the Oprah Winfrey show, I said something to Oprah I feel really sad for what I'm putting my mom through, and I'm cognizant of what I'm putting my mom through, but the voice in my head, the negative voice in my head is so loud that I can't talk back to it. And so, even being aware that you are causing pain for others, you, in that moment, aren't strong enough to talk back enough to try to be well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Powerful
Yeah.
stuff. Why did you choose to write this story in verse?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for that question. I wrote a book called The Gift of Story, Exploring the Affective Side of the Reading Life, a book that I never thought I would finish. And in that book, I have a chapter called Story as Clarifier. And it was the first time as an adult that I ever opened up a little bit about my eating disorder. And the reason that I did in that chapter was because I was stuck and I couldn't become unstuck. Well, I knew it would help me become unstuck. But if I just wrote these 30 words about my eating disorder that I applied to Story as Clarifier, I would be able to write the rest of the chapter. And I kept telling my editor, I need out of this contract. I can't write this book. And my editor kept saying, no, John, take the time that you need. You can do it. And after six weeks or so of being stuck, I finally wrote those 30 words, and then the rest of the book just came out of me. It was like my heart opened up completely and my soul billowed out. And so in that moment, I knew maybe I could eventually write more about that part in my life, but I needed to finish The Gift of Story first. So I wrote The Gift of Story. I did all the revision. And then the week after, I turned in The Gift of Story, like complete manuscript. This voice, the voice of me and adolescence, just started speaking to me. And I knew immediately that it was in verse. And these poems just poured out of me. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And then I went to Paris and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote about 100 poems in Paris. And then I came back and I eventually shared it with my agent. And I said, I don't know what this is, if it is a story or not. And she read it and she said, yes, this is a story. Keep writing. And I went back and I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And I could only have done it in verse because the way that the character who's, based on me spoke to me, I knew was in verse. And it's such a difficult topic that needed the white space and the margins in order to tell it. And I can only hear the cadence of the voice in verse. So it was never written any other way than verse.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I can see, I was on a flight from New York to Chicago and I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is finally the story I've been trying, thinking about telling for so long, but didn't feel quite ready yet emotionally, as I talked about before.
Well, I'm really, really happy that you found that verse and that voice and that you shared this, because I think we talk a lot here in the podcast about books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. I think obviously this would be a powerful book for anybody suffering with an eating disorder. But I think it also would be a really powerful experience for kids, for any kid, to be able to read so that they could develop some empathy for their classmates who are suffering from any kind of mental health crisis. And we know that there are more and more kids struggling with anxiety and depression and anorexia and all those other issues. And
that's my hope. And also, the more and more people who read it relate to it. Even I don't relate to the eating disorder, but they relate to that inner saboteur. They relate to that voice that's telling them that they're not good enough. And I haven't really talked to very many people about that voice, until now. And I realize so many people have it. It just comes in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so many people who will relate to Louder Than Hunger on a personal level that I hadn't expected. Yeah.
I hope this doesn't sound like a flippant question. I don't mean it to be, but I'm just curious. Did there come a time, you're speaking about this voice that is inside your head that is still there but isn't as powerful? Yeah. Were you able at some point to just turn to that voice and just say, shut up? I'm not listening to you anymore.
In my own treatment as an adolescent.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, now as an adult, I write about that in the back matter, that every so often that voice wakes up, and it terrifies me when it wakes up. But thankfully, I have the skills and strategies, thanks to therapy, thanks to lots of reflection, thanks to life experiences, that I say to myself, why is this voice waking up? And what is going on in my life? And why do I feel like I don't have control? And what can I do to make sure that I never get back to where I was? And there was this scary moment that happened to me when I was revising Louder Than Hunger, that my brilliant editor, Susan Van Meter, asked me to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I went so deep that I started to do the characters' behaviors, and I was terrified. And I already had safeguards in place, and I wrote my editor and I wrote my agent and said, I'm writing really good poetry, but I've gone too far again, and I need to back up and figure out, you cannot become unwell, you cannot become sick again because you're trying to write from the true perspective of you when you were a child. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I do not like the way this feels, and I know for certainty I would never want to go back to that. And this was just like 2 days of living that again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, but I just think we come up with we learn strategies for how not to listen to that voice and things to avoid, and to protect our hearts.
Yeah. Well, I think, if nothing else, I'm hoping that people who are listening to us and who read Louder Than Hunger come away with the knowledge that it can get better.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. Because I won't even name the books, but one of the reasons that I was hesitant to write Louder Than Hunger was because in many ways the books that I read when I was a teen in the 90s were how-to manuals. They taught me how to be sick. They taught me how to have an eating disorder. And thankfully there have been many people before me who've worked really hard to get those books taken off of shelves, not as censorship, but just saying, these are not books that are going to help a child get to the other side. These are books that are going to help a child develop an eating disorder. And so something that I always had in front of me on a Post-it note is something that I write in my book, The Gift of Story, which is that books can be the perfect prescriptions to let us know that we're going to be okay. And if ever I thought I was adding something to the book that wasn't going to be the perfect prescription to let a child know that they were going to be okay, it did not belong in the book. That was my, that was my guiding light writing it, because I was a product, living proof of what negative, media and negative books about eating disorders can do to you. And I was not growing up in a time where there were lots of, pro-anorexia websites and other things that are teaching people how to have eating disorders, which is terrifying, and another topic all in and of itself.
Yeah. Hey, before we go, I know that you are a huge advocate for books, and you're part of something called Bookalicious. Can you take just a minute to tell us what that's all about and how it can help families?
Yeah. So I'm the children's librarian for Bookalicious, and Leanne Borders is the founder of Bookalicious, of the Borders family. And so when I was a teenager growing up, we had two choices in the town where I lived. We could go to Barnes & Noble or we could go to Borders. And depending on my mood, I would either go to one or the other. But I loved Borders so much because of the music section, and it had an indie feel. I didn't even know the word independent. I didn't know the phrase independent bookshop then. And so I was really sad when Borders went away, and I was really happy when Leanne Borders, the wife of Lewis Borders, who started Borders Books when he was in college in Ann Arbor, Michigan, contacted me about joining her startup, which takes a lot of the philosophy of Borders Books about matching people with books based on, a variety of metrics. I was really, really excited. So Bookalicious is an online independent bookstore that does a lot of good in the world, I believe.
Awesome.
For matching kids with the perfect book, and families as well.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about reluctant readers out there. I think there are just readers who haven't found the book that they will help them fall in love with reading.
Yeah. So I think it is. I think so much of, I was a school librarian for 9 years, so much of that is listening critically to match catch kids with books, and never being judgmental and meeting them where they are, and being enthusiastic through story and of story, and sharing your heart through story, I think is the best way to help kids find that book.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of lots of kids everywhere who was probably saved by a school librarian like I was, Mrs. Drew, I'm sure she was the reason I was not thrown out of school, because I was that kid who had a lot of extra energy, and that was before medications were invented, I guess. But anyways, my teachers, they figured out that I loved being in the library, where it was a place where I could go and I could write and I could create and we could do all sorts of neat things. So they would say, finish your work, go down the library. Yeah. And that's where I spent most of my time. And so big thank you for you and to all the school librarians out there.
Yeah, I love it. Library can be a safe haven.
Absolutely. Yeah. John, please tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Louder Than Hunger, and also find out more about you, please.
Oh, yeah. So if you go to johnschu.com, and then on all social media, I'm Mr. Schu Reads, MRSCHU Reads. That's the best way.
Awesome. We've had a really, really powerful time speaking to the author of Louder Than Hunger. Our guest has been John Schu. John, thank you so very much.
No, thank you so much. Our time went so quickly.
This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Adventures of Toby Baxter, Book 2, River Home for the Holidays. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read written by Tim Wright. River Home for the Holidays delivers a captivating blend of humor, danger, and inspiration. For lovers of fantasy with mythical creatures, this book is a must-read, promising a thrilling and heartwarming adventure. Dive into the enchanting world of River Home alongside Toby Baxter, and you won't be disappointed. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read, great middle grade novel. You want to add this to your family library. The Adventures of Toby Baxter, Book 2, River Home for the Holidays, written by Tim Wright. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Melusine, Birds of Many Feathers. Put down your iPads, young explorers. Have you ever wondered about the mysteries hidden in your own backyard? Join Melusine on an adventure to uncover a mysterious bird right in her backyard. Look, over there. What bird could that be? On every page, meet a diverse world filled with feathered friends and neighbors. This tale is perfect for young readers aged 5 to 10, and it's not your ordinary birding adventure, but a true appreciation of biodiversity. And you know what? The adventure doesn't stop there. Melusine, Bird of Many Feathers, is an ideal companion for the Great Backyard Bird Count, which starts February 16th to 19th, 2024. Participate in this exciting event with families from around the world and bring the joy of bird watching to your home. Grab your binoculars, everyone. Melusine, Birds of Many Feathers is available now at your favorite bookstore and online. Autographed copies and exclusive offers are available at kiddlewinkspublishing.com. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Wisconsin. Our guest is here today to celebrate her really fun book. It's called Strong Girls Travel. Please welcome to the show, Amy Friedl. Hey, Amy, how are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I can't wait for you to talk to us about Strong Girls Travel. I love strong women. I'm surrounded by strong women in my life. My beautiful wife, my daughter, my niece, lots of cousins, and so it's great to see those people portrayed really positively in a book.
Thank you. I'm very excited. There are a few different National Park book series, but none with a girl as the main character, and so I'm excited to change that story a little bit.
Yeah. Hey, before we jump into the specifics of the book, the national parks here in the United States, and there are national parks around the world, but they're really a wonderful gift. Can you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to write about national parks and how important they are?
Sure. So a few years ago, I was coming out of a pretty rough chapter of my own life, and I took to being outdoors as part of my healing process. Started getting out and hiking and learning how to kayak and doing things outside. And we took a trip back in 2021, a couple girlfriends and I and our kids, to go visit my daughter who was living near Glacier National Park. And we were driving through the park. I'm going to the Sun Road, and we took a break, and I was sitting on this wall overlooking these mountains and just thinking every little girl needs to know that they can come on an adventure like this, that they can do this, that they're strong enough and brave enough and capable. And that kind of was the birth of Strong Girls Travel, of the idea of writing a book series set in national parks where girls know that they can go do brave, intimidating things. Yeah. Making safe, smart choices, but going and not being afraid to do things. So the idea came from that, to write a children's book series set in national parks with a girl as the main character. And that's where that came from.
I'm really happy that you made the point of saying, girls can travel and do this, and do it safely. Mm-hmm. And it's not only girls and women who need to be thinking about how to do things safely when they're traveling, especially by themselves. I did a lot of traveling by myself when I was a youngin', decades ago, when I was 20, and I remember being in a national park in Canada and really not knowing a whole lot in camping by myself. And thankfully, I ran into a ranger who told me, it's kind of dangerous trying to go up that mountain at this time of year because you're not going to make it down when the sun is out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's going to take me how long to climb up? And I was really, really grateful, because otherwise I would have found myself up on top of a mountain and trying to get down without a flashlight and without any help. And I imagine that wouldn't have been too pretty.
I think every little tip we can pick up along the way is a helpful one.
Yeah. So who are the strong girls we're going to meet in the series?
So AJ is the main character, and she, as of now, she is planning to be the main character in all the stories. They're not, it's not building on the last story. So each story is a standalone set in that park, that she's either traveling or lives near or experiencing. So AJ is our main character. In this story, AJ's adventures in Indiana Dunes National Park, she is meeting up with her cousin Charlie, female Charlie, that she hasn't seen in a couple of years.
Wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about that national park and why you chose to start the series there?
Absolutely. So Indiana Dunes National Park, recently adopted as a national park. It was a state, well, there's still a state park, but was a national lakeshore and was adopted as a national park. I actually forget the year, but it's close to home. And so I took a big road trip last 2 springs ago where I hit 7 national parks in 9 days with the goal of getting in the parks, adventuring somehow, learning some lesson about life or myself or the world or my part in it, and taking pictures for my illustrator to use. On that trip, Indiana Dunes was my last one on the way home. And Lake Michigan has always kind of grounded me. I grew up in Milwaukee, and so it's very close to home and near to home. And I remember visiting the dunes in high school youth group. And so I started with that, I think, because it's close to home. And it's just close to my heart. And I can go visit. It's only 3 hours from where I live, and so I'm already looking to go visit bookstores and get it into bookstores down at the park. And I also like the idea of promoting these parks and educating people about these parks that are not, the big 3, the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone and Yosemite. Those are absolutely gorgeous in their own right, I would assume. I haven't been that direction. But lots of people write about them and like to talk about them. But there is a beauty in some of these lesser-known parks, like Indiana Dunes, and Mammoth Caves, Kentucky is coming up next. And these East Coast or East Side parks that people just, they need to know that they can get down there too, and that there's some gorgeous places close by.
Yeah.
What's cool about Indiana Dunes is the park is it's at the base of Lake Michigan, and it's shifting sand dunes. And so it's pretty unique to see these, oak savannas coming out of sand mountains, if you will.
It sounds beautiful. One of the things you were sharing with me before we started, Amy, is that this is a picture book, but it was not written necessarily with 5 and 6-year-olds in mind. It was written for older kids. Can you talk a little bit about why you made that choice?
Sure. So I was a middle school English teacher off and on for about 20 years. I taught 7th grade. They're my favorites. And I know that they are capable of reading more on a page, but they often aren't willing to read more on a page. And so oftentimes if they were in the middle of a book or they just finished a book, I would say, well, for silent reading time, then pick a vacation book or pick a break book. And those were the picture books that I had in my room because they could still get the concept of story and still read a lot and get a lot out of it without feeling like they had to commit to a novel. And so this is why I wanted to write for that age group. 7 on the lower end, 12 on the high end. But I know, that 5th, 6th, 7th grade reader in mind who is capable of reading more on a page. There are a few words in here that they will know, that they'll recognize, or they might have to look up, which I think makes it interesting. Whereas, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds aren't going to know some of these words like a thermos, like a hot cocoa thermos and things like that. So, written really with a little bit older reader in mind, but still wants to read a picture book because they don't have to commit to something longer.
I imagine too that while you didn't use the term reluctant reader, I'm imagining that this would be a great book for that audience. And also, I hate to say it, but there are a whole lot of kids in that age range that aren't readers, and they're not reading on grade level. And and I'm just a dope, so I don't know anything. I'm not an educator, but it just makes a whole lot of sense to me that if you have a kid in 5th, 6th, 7th grade who's not reading on grade level and they can't sit down and really get anything or get through a middle grade novel, then let's get them something that they can get through and develop that love of reading that most kids, well, ideally kids get in their 1st and 2nd grade. You don't get it. We can't leave you behind. We need to be able to find a way to get kids who aren't reading competently, who aren't loving reading as they get older, to help them fall in love with books, because books and reading is such an important part of our lives.
I would agree with that. In 3rd grade, at least in the United States, 3rd grade is usually that pivot point where they spend the first few years learning how to read and then the rest of their lives reading to learn. But something happens around that 5th, 6th, 7th grade where either things aren't interesting to them anymore. They are told to read things they don't want to learn, but they have to read it anyway. And they become, like you said, reluctant to pursue that. Excuse me, the few students that I had a select group of students last year when I was still teaching that helped me with this idea with the book. And some of them would read it, some of those, quote, reluctant readers, some of them would read it and then would be interested in the park and would go pick up a nonfiction book about the park or about sand dunes. They would want to learn more about the sand dunes and go get nonfiction. Some of them were drawn to the idea that my pictures are in the back of the book, but my illustrator took those pictures and turned them into artwork. And so some of those kids, those creative ones, said, wait, how did he do that? And so then they're going and reading more about creating digital art or about photography. And so if this book can be a channel for them to be interested and figure out what they're interested in, whatever avenue it might be, and then choose to read to learn more about that topic, then I've done my job and I've created interest.
Do you think, and I don't know, you're more of the expert here, that kids in that age group who are kind of falling out of love with reading, even if they had, jumped into it and started and read Harry Potter as a first grader, like my son did. And then they get to 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and suddenly it's like, all you need to do is read this book to get an A in your class, and you're not sitting down, you're not reading it. But at the same time, they're reading a graphic novel. They're reading your book. They're reading, one of those, Ripley's Believe It or Not that has, a very short story with lots of pictures on every page. Is it that they're just not interested in committing a day or 2 or 3 to reading a long-form story?
My experience over the last couple of years, and especially since COVID changed education a little bit, my experience has been one of 2 reasons. One, they don't want to commit to something that long because their attention span is so much shorter now, right? We all know this. Their attention span is short, so to look at a book that, oh, that's so thick, I can't commit to that. We as adults know it's only 100 pages. That won't take you that long, but they can't see the other side of that. I think the other thing I've seen is, as educators, we're told, choose high-interest books, choose high-interest books. Well, I'm 48 years old. I'm not going to be interested in the same thing a 12-year-old is, and certainly not now in 2023, back however many years ago, whatever year it was when I was 12, we're not going to have the same interests. And so if we as educators are not engaging kids in making those choices and saying, well, what is interesting, they're not going to jump at our choices because we think they're interesting, because we're not cool. We don't get it. We're old. And I know the school that I was recently at, we were told we tried our best to make a wide selection of choice novels, but you're not going to hit every interest, and you're not going to hit every kid with that selection that you make. It's tough. And if we're not including them more in those choices, we're not going to get their buy-in.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned that the pandemic changed education. In what ways?
I think a lot of kids learned, honestly, and I might be a bit cynical, so feel free to edit this out, because I've recently left education. But I think a lot of students and families learned that you don't have to do a whole lot to progress to the next grade. I think especially in America, just from things that I've read, that you can do a little bit and still move on. I also think there's a lot more reliance, at least my experience here in my part of Wisconsin, there's a lot of reliance on the state test. And so pushing through, and kids pick up on that. And even when, administrators will say, don't teach to the test, we have to, because that's what is looked at, by the community, by the state. And kids pick up on that, and they don't care about it because no job interview will ever ask them, well, how did you do on that 7th grade state test? Mm-hmm. That there's just not a lot of buy-in, and kids can get a lot of information off of YouTube. I had kids ask me, what do I need you for? I can Google this.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting, and I am certainly not going to edit this out of the podcast, because you're the first person that mentioned that kids and parents kind of discover that, you really, if the goal is to move from 4th grade to 5th grade, 5th grade to 6th grade, 6th grade to 7th grade, really doesn't take all that much. And in a lot of cases, it just, you don't commit a felony, you don't commit murder, you're gonna get moved on. And I've heard the reasons. I had been in social service, human services, coming out of college. I heard the reasons for social promotion, and on paper it's like, okay, you don't want a 16-year-old, in school with 8-year-olds. But I don't think that's the only choice that we have to make. And I don't think we're doing a service to kids or to families when we sit back and go, you just kind of show up some of the time, and we'll move you along, and you'll end up getting that high school diploma that everybody thinks that we need.
I completely agree with you, and I think because we're pushing kids along and saying, well, no, you're this age, therefore you must be in this grade, is a big reason why I have 7th graders at a first and second grade reading level, and consistently every year. And not students with IEPs who struggle, just kids who didn't want to for too long, or weren't pushed, or weren't included in the choice process. High number of these middle school students are at low elementary reading levels, and that was one of the reasons that I chose to write, the type of book that I did, is at least appeal, give some sort of appeal to those kids, because if a kid can read this, like I said, and be interested in some other element of it, the photography, the history, the landscape, whatever, and start to pursue something that they will look into as teenagers or adults, then that's okay.
Yeah.
Then they can read a picture book for the day if it inspires them or motivates them to want to choose another thing to look into.
Yeah. It always, my beautiful wife taught for 34 years, and it always, the thing that really kind of blew my mind was when she would come home and tell me that, she had a meeting with a parent, and it was obvious that the kid wasn't doing, wasn't reading on grade level, wasn't on level with math, and the parent was saying, well, then the kid's going to repeat the grade, right? And the administrator, oh, no, they're moving on. And both my beautiful wife and the parent would sit there and go, but the kid's not ready. And how is this helping?
I had the same experience. A lot of parents would request their child to stay back. And our administration board, the higher ups, have decided for us that that's not how it's going to work.
Yeah. I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I really think, obviously, there's no one easy solution for this. But I think one of the things we need to do is we really need to change the way that we look at education. We need to, on the upper end, we need to get away from the point that every single kid is pressured to go to college and to take out $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 in loans and spend 4 years studying I don't know what, and coming out and not being able to get a job that can pay back those student loans that can't be forgiven. And the same token, I think we need to, look at this idea of social promotion and just like, oh, you're X age, then you need to be with these group of kids, even though you're not, your maturity level is lower and your abilities are lower, and it's just an age thing, and that's just, you just have to go there because that's just the way we decided to do it.
I would agree with that. And I think, like you said, you can't fix it all, but we can start with that.
Yeah.
We can start with looking at the social promotion. That is something we can control.
Yeah.
Especially at those different grade levels. High school is so focused on all three of my kids. Well, my youngest is about to graduate high school, and the pressure to perform well on the ACT, 2 of them are not in school. 2 of my 3 are not even in college. Like, well, then why was all that pressure there? But if at the younger levels, if we can focus on that social promotion idea, that's something we can control.
I'm wondering too, and getting away from our thought about education that I think we could probably talk for a week about. I think one of the things that hopefully your books will do is to help kids not only fall in love with reading, but fall in love with national parks, because they really are a wonderful resource and a gift that belongs to all of us.
I love that. And I really hope that the goal is that families will engage with this book as well. At the back of the book, just because, I want families to be engaged, is I have a couple pages of my actual pictures from the park, and my illustrator loved the idea that families could take this book with them to the park, open a page and say, oh, that's where we are. I recognize that. AJ's here too, because he took my exact pictures and converted them. We also have a full adventure checklist at the back for families to engage in more areas of the park than just where the story takes place. Using the online resources and maps and things, we created a list of go to this part of the park and do this thing, or go count how many different species of birds you find on this bog walk, or go to the boardwalk here and go skip rocks, or different different adventures for families to experience in the park as a whole.
Yeah. Hey, I'm wondering, you mentioned a couple of parks that are going, the one park that's in your first book and the park that will be featured in your second book. What other national parks are you hoping to celebrate in this series?
Well, ideally, I would love to write one for every national park. However, there are 8 national parks in Alaska alone. So I guess I'd have to go there and see how different they look from an illustrative point of view. And also, the goal is to write the books so that a kid could go and adventure there. So the storyline needs to be attainable, something kids could do. I recently took a trip up to Voyageurs National Park in northern Minnesota and Isle Royale, which is a national park on an island in the middle of Lake Superior. Kids might go to that. There were families going to the lodge at Isle Royale. Most kids reading this probably won't be doing the 49-mile wilderness backpacking ridge of that. So my story won't be about that. It'll be something that kids can attain, kids can, that they can see themselves doing. So recently with that trip that I just took, I have adventured at all of the national parks east of the Mississippi, except for Maine and Florida. I haven't been there yet. So I have enough material right now because I won't write the book until I go adventure and take my pictures there. So I have enough right now for 9 books, all east of the Mississippi. And I'll keep pursuing this and keep writing and then keep traveling.
Well, I'm going to put a plug in for one of my favorite. It's a national forest. That's different than a national park, right?
It is, but I also have ideas around some of the national lake shores. So okay. I'm open to the idea.
Well, certainly the National Seashore here in Massachusetts, Cape Cod, is beautiful and very diverse, and there's all sorts of wonderful science and kind of STEM ideas that you can explore visiting that area. But I would encourage you, even if you can't write a book about it, but to visit the only tropical rainforest within the U.S. National Forest system, which is El Yunque down in Puerto Rico.
Oh.
So check that out. It's pretty special. Hey, Amy, where can we go to find out more about Strong Girls Travel and also find out more about you?
Sure. So stronggirlstravel.com has lots of things on there. There are free coloring pages if any parents want to hop on and just print out some coloring pages for the strong kids in their life. I also interview women doing brave, intimidating things so far all over the Midwest, further than the Midwest. So there are interviews there if anybody wants to just go be inspired by women doing pretty cool, courageous things. I have an About the Author page. You can learn a little more about me, and you can find the links to my books on there as well.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Strong Girls Travel, a great picture book series for older kids written by our guest, Amy Friedl. Hey, Amy, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Of course, we love to communicate with our listeners. A great way to do that is by connecting with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids. At Reading With Your Kids on Instagram and TikTok, and it's at Gently Magic on Twitter. Another way you can get in touch with us is by visiting our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can check out our blog, download our free online magazine, visit our Reading With Your Kids Certified Great Read Hall of Fame, and use the contact button up at the top of the page to send us a message. Let us know what you love about the show. Let us know what we could be doing better. And let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the show. And if you are an author, please be sure to click the Authors Click Here button to find out how you can be a guest here on the podcast. And you can also learn about our effective and affordable promotional services. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guests, our sponsors, and, of course, my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Skylar Strauss, Nick Warner, Kyoko Ito, Kaylin Newland, Kristen Barrett, Sydney Swan, Hannah Rose. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.